Astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson once did something before appearing on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart that most people would never think to do. He didn't spend all his time rehearsing what he wanted to say. He didn't obsess over sounding smarter. He didn't create perfect talking points. Instead, he studied the environment he was walking into. Before his first appearance, Tyson watched previous interviews and noticed something interesting. Jon Stewart was funny, fast, and incredibly good at what he did. Guests would begin answering a question. Jon would jump in with a joke. The audience would laugh. And the conversation would take a detour. And suddenly the guest was talking about something completely different. Nobody had done anything wrong. That was simply how the show worked. Tyson realized something important. Many guests showed up prepared to deliver their message, but they hadn't prepared for the conditions under which they would be delivering it. So he got curious. He used a stopwatch and began studying guest segments. He wanted to know how much uninterrupted time people typically had before a joke or a follow-up question, a change of topic, or a commercial break altered the flow of the conversation. He wasn't preparing his content, he was preparing for reality. That distinction matters more than most people realize because most of us prepare for situations that don't actually exist. Think about how often this happens. You prepare for a difficult conversation by scripting exactly what you are going to say. Then the other person responds in a way you didn't even expect, and suddenly you're off script. Or you prepare for a job interview by memorizing answers to questions, and then the interviewer asks something completely different. Or you prepare to start a business by focusing on your product. Then you discover the real challenge is marketing. You prepare to write a book, then you learn that writing wasn't the hard part. Showing up consistently was. We spend enormous amounts of energy preparing for our ideal version of an event. But life rarely unfolds according to our ideal version. The people who tend to navigate challenges most effectively often do something different. They study the terrain. They ask questions that most people skip. What is this environment actually like? What patterns keep showing up? What obstacles are predictable? Where do people usually get stuck? What am I likely to encounter? Those questions may not feel exciting, but they are often the questions that change outcomes. Imagine someone preparing for a marathon. So one person spends all their time imagining crossing the finish line. The other studies the course. They learn where the hills are. They learn where runners typically lose momentum. They learn where hydration stations are located. Both people are preparing, but only one is preparing for the actual reality they'll face. The same thing happens in everyday life. Someone decides they're finally going to get organized, so they buy a planner. They create color-coded systems. They map out their week. Then Thursday arrives, and they're tired. Work runs late. The dog needs to go to the vet. A family member calls. Everything falls apart. The problem wasn't a lack of planning. The problem was preparing for a version of life where nothing unexpected happened. That's not preparation. That's actually wishful thinking. Tyson's approach was different. He wasn't asking, what do I want to say? He was asking, what is the situation actually going to be like? That's a remarkably useful question. What is the situation actually going to be like? Not what you hope it will be like, not what it should be like, not what would make things easiest. What is it actually going to be like? If you're starting a YouTube channel, it's probably going to involve periods where very few people watch. If you're building a business, you'll probably spend more time solving problems than enjoying success. If you're trying to improve your health, there are going to be days where motivation completely disappears. If you're working toward a goal, you'll eventually encounter confusion and setbacks and delays and moments where you wonder whether it's worth continuing. Those are not signs that something has gone wrong. Those are often the conditions under which success is built. The people who are most resilient aren't necessarily the people with the most confidence. Often they're the people who correctly anticipated what was coming. When a setback arrives, they don't panic. They expected resistance. When things take longer than planned, they don't assume they're failing. They expected delays. When the path gets messy, they don't assume they're on the wrong path because they expected messiness. Preparation becomes much more powerful when it includes reality. This reminds me of something that happens whenever people start pursuing a meaningful goal. This is what I've noticed. They spend a lot of time deciding what they want. Then they spend a lot of time deciding how they'll get it. But they spend very little time asking what will try to stop them. What distractions are likely to appear? What excuses do they typically make? What emotional reactions tend to derail them? What circumstances repeatedly knock them off track? Those questions are incredibly valuable because most obstacles are not surprises. They're actually patterns. The same challenges often show up again and again. The same fears, the same distractions, the same habits, the same stories, the same reasons for waiting. Imagine how different your progress might look if you prepared for those things, instead of being surprised by them every time they appear. What if you knew in advance that your enthusiasm would eventually fade? What if you knew in advance that self-doubt would visit? What if you knew in advance that some people wouldn't understand what you were doing? What if you knew in advance that progress would feel invisible for a while? You wouldn't need to panic when those things actually happen. You'd simply recognize them. You'd say, there it is. This is one of the things I knew I would encounter. That's exactly what Tyson was doing. He wasn't trying to control the interview. He wasn't trying to eliminate interruptions. He wasn't demanding that reality accommodate his plans. He was studying reality so his plans could accommodate reality. There's a wisdom in that. A lot of frustration comes from preparing for the wrong thing. We prepare for the speech, not the nerves. We prepare for the goal, not the setbacks. We prepare for the opportunity, not the conditions surrounding the opportunity. And then we're surprised when those conditions show up. Maybe one of the most useful questions you can ask yourself this week is this: what situation am I currently preparing for? Then ask yourself a second question. What is that situation actually going to be like? Not ideally, not theoretically, not according to a motivational quote you read, but in real life. Because the people who tend to succeed aren't always the people who prepare the most. They're often the people who prepare for what they're actually going to encounter. And sometimes that small shift changes everything. If you're watching this and you need some one-on-one conversation with me where we can flesh out what you're dealing with, join my school community. The link is in the description. And please share this video with someone who's been having the same conversation with themselves. I'll see you in the next one.